Hello, and a big warm welcome to the Guardian Doula's Diary podcast. My name is Angela Deuce, or Angie. I'm your host and the founder of Guardian Doula. I'm a certified birth and postpartum doula and childbirth educator based on Sydney's Northern Beaches and serving women and their families all throughout Sydney. This podcast is an honest collection of the stories and experiences of birthing women and the professionals that support them to empower, equip, and inspire us all. Let's get into it. So, why don't you tell us about yourself, who you are, what you do, kick us off.
Yep. So I'm Ruby. I am a mother of 5. I feel like I say that first nowadays because it takes up the most time.
Yes.
So 5 under 4.5. So Frankie, my eldest, was 4.5 when Lottie, the baby, was born. And then everyone kind of goes, how is that possible? So Frankie is now, I guess, coming on 5.5. Alfie is coming on 4. Then we've got twin girls, so Sadie and Polly, fraternal, and then Lottie, who is 10 months now.
Wow.
And then outside of mum life, I am a chiropractor. So I've been a chiro for, I think, about 10 years and love it. I do a lot of work with pregnant women, babies, postpartum, that sort of niche, just because it's always interested me. And then I think since being a mum, I developed that interest even further. And then loved it so much since having my kids that I went back to uni to study midwifery. That was all going well until I fell pregnant and I was very unwell. And in hindsight, I was so unwell because I was pregnant with twins.
Oh my goodness.
So I ended up deferring the degree then and then have had 3 kids since. So I haven't got to the degree, which is, I think I had mentioned to you that I had started kind of going down the doula avenue.
Yes.
And so I started kind of doing my own stuff and building up little sheets and bits and pieces before fully committing to doing the training. And then in standard Ruby world, my computer crashed. I hadn't backed it up and I lost everything. So
yes. Oh my goodness. I remember you telling me that.
Yeah.
Oh, how devastating.
Yes. So I'm back to sort of not square one with that, but I've lost a lot. So we're slowly building that dream back up. And I'm kind of navigating where I want to go with it, because I think where I've landed, and probably from even chatting to people like you, knowing that I don't want to be in a hospital full time. I love my job already. And really the primary reason that I went back to do midwifery was to upskill. It wasn't to have a career shift. It was to incorporate more knowledge into my current job. So I feel as though I can actually better do that and help women a lot better by being a doula, because I can be there for the whole journey, which I kind of am already through my job, but more, I guess, be more knowledgeable and be more present in that part of their journey.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you all about the benefits of chiropractic care when you're pregnant and postpartum and all the things, but just out of interest, did you do much chiropractics when you were pregnant with your own babies? Was that something that you used a lot? And what was your experience like?
Yeah, so I've always worked in like a family-based clinic, so always in clinics that serve the whole family from newborn to geriatric, basically, from one end of the spectrum to the other, and loved and kind of being gravitated towards kids. And then when I fell pregnant actually my first pregnancy, unfortunately, was a miscarriage.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But thank you. But unfortunately, it's the reality of a lot of what we go through. Makes it all the more joyous when the next one comes around.
Yes.
So when I conceived the first time, I was working full time, like a lot of hours.
Wow.
And one of the clinics that I worked in had a woman who was doing a further pediatric chiropractic degree.
Oh, cool.
And so she was super interested in it and had chiro my entire pregnancy. I ended up miscarrying at 13 weeks. So whether pregnancy chiropractic for that particular baby wasn't as impactful, because obviously, the impact of body work in the early stages aren't as significant as they're needed down the track when all of your biomechanics, et cetera, are changing. So from there, Frankie was next baba. And I ended up working there the whole time through that pregnancy and was treated multiple times a week because I could, right?
That's so
like,
cool.
we all looked after each other, and we treat each other as much as we would, because you can, and it's always good to do things for yourself. And so yes, I would get treated every week, if not multiple times a week.
Wow.
And honestly, other than vomiting my guts up for 18 weeks straight, physically, like, I would say that I would thrive in the second, third trimester, just because I never was in pain. I always was moving well. I was able to go to the gym as much as I wanted, and it never impacted my way of life once I overcome that horrible nausea period.
Mm.
And I do believe that a significant component of that was because I was getting chiro. Obviously, luck of the draw as well. I'm actually also fortunate enough to be young, having my baby, so I think that probably worked in my favour. But yeah, I do. I think that a lot of it contributed to the fact that I was having regular chiro. So I guess with that, continued to do the same thing for the rest of my pregnancies. I then had obviously the workload of looking after toddlers as well. And then the twin pregnancy was even harder on me. But I was able to work through to 35 weeks as a chiro with a twin pregnancy, which I think is pretty phenomenal.
That is phenomenal.
How like hands-on and physical the job is. So yeah, my body held up very well. And I guess not only, which we can chat about, but not only does chiro help you throughout the pregnancy with any symptoms or ailments that you might be experiencing, a lot of what we do is about preparing mum and bub by proxy to have the most straightforward birth that you can have. So yeah, encouraging our posture and alignment to assist us if your goal is to have a vaginal birth. To be in the best possible position to allow for that. So for me, I think, again, really fortunate to have had that tool in my tool belt to assist me with my births. Yeah.
So cool. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I always love chatting to mums about how much we can do to, I guess, just make us as likely as possible to have the birth that we hope for. Like, I think there's so much out there, like this narrative of like, oh, you can't control birth. It's completely outside of your hands. And there is some truth to that. Like, obviously there are things about birth that we can't control, but there is so much that we can do. You can decide like what model of care you're going to be in, whether you hire a doula, whether you look after your body, how you eat, how you move, like all of these things can work together and have a really big impact. So it's so cool.
On that note as well, you won't ever know which things you did and which you didn't do that contributed to your overall experience, right? And so it's like, why not throw the kitchen sink at it and do all of the good things to help you as much as you can?
Totally.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm so the same. I feel like even the weird and wonderful little things like eating dates and like all those funny things, I'm like, why not? Like, there's no harm in it. There's some evidence that says that it's helpful. Some evidence is like, it's inconclusive. We don't know, but it's like, it's definitely not dangerous. Like, you may as well do all the thing.
Well, did you know pineapple? Have you heard of pineapple as the newest thing?
I've not heard of the pineapple one.
Yeah, they've just done a study in the UK, which has given preliminary research to show that consuming pineapple in birth prep helps.
Wow, and what does it help? Is it supposed to be for cervical ripening or?
Yeah, so it's something to do with the enzyme in pineapple that helps, with effacement and ripening. I'm like, let's eat some pineapple. Why not? Like.
So funny. Yeah, totally. I mean, as you said, there's no harm in it. You may as well do all the things and yeah, 100%. What are some of the most common ailments you were mentioning about helping with symptom management and stuff like that? I mean, I imagine it's things like a sore back and even like pelvic pain. Like, are those some of the things that you see really often? Yeah.
So in regards to things that people would come to you during a pregnancy, most commonly like lower back pain for sure, and sciatica. So that, do you know what sciatica is? Like the nerve pain down into the leg. Yeah. They're the two most common by far. But then also, pelvic pain, pubic bone pain, supervision. Even like people are getting upper back pain and headaches and everything because your whole mechanics is changing, right? Yeah. Also, like as your belly grows, that pelvic tilt shifts. So you're starting to load up areas in your body that you're not used to loading up. And you also have a counter load because your body is trying to keep you upright. And so your upper back's working harder and your breasts are potentially growing and all of those sort of things. So you're just loading up areas that your normal structure is not used to holding. Yeah. And then you've got all the hormonal shift too, which contributes to so many symptoms as well. People come in second trimester, for example, you've got that huge relax and surge, and they're
Yes.
like, why am I always already feeling terrible and I'm tiny? And I'm like, it's not actually the weight that you're carrying, it's the relaxin that's pumping through your body, and all of your ligaments are starting to loosen up, and they're not meant to, in hindsight, like, well, they are to help you support, like, to support the process your body is going through, to allow a baby to come out of you, because you want to have that extra space and fluidity and flexibility in your pelvis. But right now, you need stability to get you through the rest of the pregnancy. And they're like, oh, okay, it's not actually to do with the physical load I'm carrying. It's the fact that those supportive structures aren't doing what they normally do. So it's about kind of getting them through those stages as well. There's so many different things that happen that aren't just your textbook, oh, my lower back's sore, you know?
Yeah, wow. And is there much evidence that shows that doing chiropractic work can increase your odds of having a vaginal birth, like working with your pelvis and all of that? Like, is there, I'm so interested.
There's lots of study going on. I guess, like with any, like we were just chatting about, with anything, you can't prove solely that was a contributing factor, right?
Yeah.
What it does prove is that getting your pelvis into ideal alignment allows bub to also sit in the ideal position. So it basically goes hand in hand with the concept of optimal fetal positioning, right?
Yeah.
Because if you are in a really twisted position, for want of a better word, your baby is compensating for the lack of space in certain areas, etc. Not just about positioning, but also it's about the ability to get the baby to fall and sit properly on the cervix as well.
Yeah.
Because, again, as you would know, with birth, you need that proper engagement and cervical stimulation to progress labour, right? So if bub isn't, I've lost my word, descending appropriately onto this and giving that cervical stimulation, which happened to me actually with Lottie's birth just past, that you potentially don't get that dilation. You can get like your body is telling you to push, but if you're not getting that adequate cervical stimulation, then you won't dilate and allow yourself to get to that transitional point, basically. So yeah, there's so much. There's so much to nut out in that regard. But yes, in summary, allowing mum to be in best structural position in regards to her anatomy, getting her body moving as best as possible as well, allows for bub to have the ideal chance getting into their optimal position as well.
Yeah, so cool. I often use this analogy with my clients that I feel like is exactly what you're talking about, where I think very often you'll hear women are told things like, oh, you know, your pelvis is too narrow, or which literally the medical term for that, just for anyone. Yes, it's actually less than 1%. It's 1 in every 250 pregnancies. Yeah. A woman will have what's called cephalopelvic disproportion, I think, is the acronym CPD. Yeah. Not to be confused with SPD, which I'm sure you have so many clients coming into that. SPD is common. Yes, that one's super common. But this idea of, oh, you know, the baby's not going to fit through your pelvis. But I mean, if you think of, and this is the analogy I was going to say, if you think of like a shape sorter, like, you know how the little kid shape sorting thing where you put the triangle through the triangle hole or whatever, if you are holding that shape at an angle that isn't ideal, then of course the triangle is not going to want to go through the triangle hole, you know. But if you hold the triangle properly in the right way, then it's going to fit perfectly. Like if you hold it skew, of course it's going to not, it's, you know, it's not going to go in properly. And so much of the time I feel like it's the same when it comes to birth. Like if our baby and our pelvis are not at the right like angle, or, you know, and also every woman and baby is a unique little team. Like I think we can sometimes be so obsessed in the birth world with this like LOA presentation, which for anyone listening, that's left occiput anterior. So that means that baby would be head down, facing ever so slightly towards the maternal left, so the mum's left, and then not posterior. So like baby's spine is against mum's tummy. We are obsessed with this presentation, and it's like, I mean, obviously it's true that I think, you know, for the majority of women, this is the ideal position of the baby. But we also have to trust that sometimes nature is clever. Most of the time, nature's very clever. And very often, I mean, there's this story that I love. This woman had, I think she had like 4 or 5 home births, and every single time her babies would come out breech. Every time she had breech babies. and these straightforward births, no complications, everything was fine. And it's like, I think there's so much to be said for if you were in really good alignment and if you were doing all the things, then your baby's going to settle into whatever the optimal position is for your baby. And there's so much that goes into it, like you're saying, like, you know, we have different shaped pelvises, there's different shaped uteruses, like, so yeah, doing all of this stuff just, I think, is so helpful to give your baby and your body the best chance to be in alignment, whatever that is for you, whether it's LOA or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. People get fixated on that concept. And often I am having that same chat with clients, because we'll commonly get people referred to us who have breech barbs or posterior barbs that just aren't budging, basically.
Yeah.
And often we get them sent to us quite late, which can be really hard as well, because it takes a lot of work to get a body working as best as possible. And yeah, in those end stages, bub is getting comfy. You know, you are getting bigger, the space is getting smaller. But I guess for us as well is getting, like I said, getting body into the best position. And even if they leave our office and baby isn't in LOA, then that's okay, because we're giving them as much space as we can.
Yeah.
We're giving you the tool, as many tools as we can, to then do help bub get into the position they need to be in to birth. And you're right, like, how many people birth posterior breech? ROA, right? Like, it's not straightforward, and there are anatomical anomalies, and some bubs prefer to be in a breech position, and that's okay. Yeah. So it's just, it's about making it as easy as possible.
For sure.
It's probably a summary.
Yeah, so good. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And then I'm so excited as well to hear all about your birth experiences, like after, I mean, having had 5 babies.
They're all different.
Yeah.
Well, like, yes, I would say there's a spectrum for sure.
Yep.
So where do we start? Frankie was my tough. Yeah, so first birth.
Okay. Yeah.
Frankie's definitely the toughest, which on paper is quite common, I think.
Yeah.
Well, not I think. We know that first births are usually the hardest, because the female body has a beautiful way of improving every time and making it easier and easier, whether it's the muscle memory or the, efficiency of the uterus, etc. So Frankie I had 10 days of like prodromal labor.
Oh, wow, that's hard. Gosh.
Which was hard. So every night from like probably 10 until 5,
wow,
I had 5-minute apart contractions. So decent, like it wasn't just a little niggle here and there. And every night I thought I was going into labor, like, because it was steady, it was consistent. And then the sun would rise and the contractions just went away.
Gosh, so hard as well that it was at night. Like, prodromal labor is hard, but when it's at nighttime instead of in the day, like, at least if it was in the day, you could sleep at night.
Yeah. Thankfully, like, they weren't painful enough that I wasn't able to sleep. So I was obviously going in and out and still getting some rest, which was good. In hindsight, it was because he was posterior, basically. Like, he just wasn't in that ideal position for me. We've got to be careful now after the last cat we just had. I have birthed a posterior baby, so, but for that birth, he just wasn't properly ticking, like getting me to that end point, basically, to properly tick over into that sort of more active labor.
Yeah.
So yes, 10 days to the point where speaking of care, model of care.
Yes.
So where I live, I was probably one of the first of my group. Of my group of friends that had kids. And my local hospital, anyone I knew that had given birth there recently had a really bad experience, which for me, I guess, in 2 parts, like I consider myself reasonably educated in that arena, but also like you're kind of taking word for mouth and wanting to relate to people who have gone through a similar experience. So that really deterred me away from that hospital. And so I started doing all of my research into what my other options are, basically. And for me, I have always felt comfortable in the medical system. It's never impacted me in regards to my mental health or anxiety or anything associated with it. So I was comfortable to birth at a hospital for sure. I knew that it wouldn't impact my progression of labour because I felt safe there. I trusted the system, but I also knew that it wasn't going to probably contribute to it hindering my progression as well. So I then basically looked into who was the best private obstetrician that supported the birth that I wanted. And the person I landed on, I couldn't speak more highly of.
Oh,
So
amazing.
I ended up birthing privately for all of them. Because
Wow.
I think by the end of it, I was like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's comfortable, it's safe, I know it. Knowing full well, probably, to be honest, well, the twins are a different story again, but come Lottie, I was like, oh, I'm probably not even going to make it to the hospital, and that's fine with me, you know? Like, I was happy to give birth at home, totally. Couldn't, like, you know, I've trusted my body in its entirety, but I was like, and again, I'll touch on it now, but I have very fast births.
Okay.
And so I was like, oh, the chances that I won't make the hospital is fine and cool. Like, Michael, let's have the conversation that you might be, you know,
Catching this baby
at home with nobody potentially. So,
yeah.
yes. So with Frankie, back to Frankie, first birth, 10 days along, and I'm kind of going, you know, like, what's happening here sort of thing.
Also, sorry, when did you change care providers? Was this before the prodromal labour started, or was it somewhere in the middle?
So when I was pregnant, I was looking into what model of care I would do, and that's when I decided. So I never ended up going down the public hospital route because I didn't trust the hospital that I was in the catchment for, basically.
Yeah, okay. I thought it was like a last minute kind of only at the end of the pregnancy you were like, no, I don't feel good about this. Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, no, set in stone from the get-go. Well, as soon as it needed to be.
Yeah.
So then and at the time I was comfortable with it because I had been like having this 10-day elongated labour experience. And so the obstetrician said, look, I think we need is a strong word, very strong word, to break your waters. I think you should come in and have your waters broken. And I didn't feel comfortable with it. And so I said no, which was fine. He completely respected that decision. There was never any pressure towards it other than the conversation, I suppose, other than the offer. And I acknowledge the fact that I'm really fortunate to be in a position to advocate for myself in that regard, because it could have been a different experience for a lot of women. But for me, that was fine. And I guess having that in the back of my head, I knew that if it needed to be down the track, it was there for me. So that was on a Monday. We had the conversation, and that night I went into proper established labour.
Oh, how beautiful.
So maybe I wonder if it was just that someone needed to tell me, you've got an out if you need it. I don't know, who knows. But yes, so I went into labour properly that night, which I didn't know until, well, I guess the next morning, because the standard thing happened. I went into the 10 o'clock, you know, contractions, and then they just started building up.
Gosh, so you thought like, oh, this is just this prodromal thing
Here we go again, basically.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so it ended up like building up quickly from there. And I think it was about 4 o'clock or so that I kind of made the call that I was ready to head into the hospital. And we got there soon after, within reason. And unfortunately, I had a horrible midwife.
No.
Yeah, so I guess for me, like that was kind of a reflective point as well, because I'm like, you can see how you can have them impact your experience negatively and positively. So
it's massive, massive, massive.
And I don't think at the time I knew how much it impacted my experience. I do now, because I've had 4 kids since.
Yeah.
And can contrast it to that experience. But so basically when I got there, within, I mean, it's all blurry at this point, but, you know, within an hour of being there, I was uncomfortable and kind of wanted to know where to go from here. And I had bought all of my tools, you know, my TENS machine, my massager, my ball, and I hadn't touched anything because I wanted to have that to go to and, you know, kind of progress with my tools. I didn't want to just use everything and be stuck with nothing by the end of it, right?
Yeah.
And so Michael's asking me, you know, can I get you anything? And I was like, no, I'm doing really well. And there was just then this moment that it clicked, and I was in so much pain, basically. And Frankie had moved further posterior. And so it was just that chronic back-to-back non-stop contraction, and it didn't end. I didn't get a break between contractions. I had that constant pain. And so I called the midwife in wanting some guidance. And the first thing she said when she came into the room was, first time, mum, oh, you won't get through it without any pain relief.
Oh.
And obviously little old me at 27 was like, oh, okay, sure, I take your word for it, because, you know, you're the
expert,
experienced one, expert.
Yeah.
And of course that changed the course of my birth, because I gave into the fear probably at that point. And so we started on gas, and I was off my chops, to say the least. Like, I had lost complete control of my body. Like, I was genuinely laughing, crying. I was gnashing my teeth. I was like, it was horrible.
Oh,
And
Ruby.
I couldn't control how I was feeling. And so that's when we made the call that I needed to have an epidural, because I just wanted to regain some control of the situation.
Yeah.
And so then from there, it was the cascade of intervention. It was textbook, basically. Like, I had an epidural, an episiotomy. I had a forceps lift. Have you ever had that used?
Yes. Yep.
So basically, his heart rate started declining, and so they needed to get him out faster. But I had been pushing for not ages, to be honest, for a first birth. It was over an hour, but under 2, literally. And he was just getting caught at the end. And so basically they called it a lift, where they literally just needed to guide him out at the end. But yes, the whole shebang. The recovery wasn't great, but I didn't know that as well. Like, I just thought that was what birth recovery was. I ended up having, obviously with an episiotomy, I had a whole bunch of stitches and stuff to work through. Ended up having a minor prolapse from it, which again didn't get diagnosed until after my 4th, like after having the twins.
Wow.
Because I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
Like, I had, when I was recovering from the birth, if I coughed or sneezed, I'd wee. But I kind of didn't really know what was going on down there, because there's so much happening that I was like, well, what fluid is it? Or like, you don't know.
Yeah.
And then, so that took, and then with exercise, when I was back running, that's when I kind of knew that things weren't right. But then I conceived Alfie, and it was it was a roller coaster from there, because it was back-to-back pregnancies and everything. So then we had Alfie. Alfie was a sneeze, and he was out, which was the most beautiful contrast to Frankie's birth. So actually, probably a good thing to note with after Frankie's birth, I think I went into his birth, I was so used to having conversations with all of my clients about their births and what they were doing to work towards having their optimal experience or ideal scenario, that I hadn't, and birthing techniques and calm birth techniques and all of this sort of stuff, which I do concurrently with my treatment, is to educate them as well. And I think in hindsight, I thought that because I had those tools, I knew how to implement them for myself, but I didn't. I'd never actually kind of done that work myself.
Yeah, being on the other end.
Yeah. And so after Frankie's birth, when I was pregnant with Alfie, I went and did she birth.
Okay.
Which I can't speak more highly of. It's such an awesome course to do. And even I remember walking out of the course with Michael, and he was just like, even I feel more in control, like I can contribute. Because when shit hit the fan with Frankie's birth, Michael felt helpless, because we didn't really practice anything. So it was a really aha moment, like knowing, you got to actually put the work in and practice it, because just because you know stuff doesn't mean that you can implement it. So with Alfie was a Boxing Day due date.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, well, let's come on, little man. Like, let's get you in earlier. I'd love you not to be born on Christmas.
So Alfie's your second, right?
So he's number 2. And very reflective of his personality. He's an absolute go-getter, as the birth also will show you. So I went into labour again, I think the way my body works is that I don't have Braxton Hicks's. I have contractions. Like, as in those lead-up weeks, my body is clearly doing a lot already that you would argue to say is early labour, so that when my labour actually kicks off, I almost instantly get into active labour, basically.
Wow.
So I went to the hospital at 7, and he was born at 8:30.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I got to the hospital and I was 4 centimeters dilated. Means nothing.
Yeah.
But as for context.
Yeah.
And within an hour and a half, I had birthing.
And this is so important that women share this stuff.
Yeah.
Because so often, if you rock up to the hospital feeling like things are really intense and you hear, oh, I'm 4 centimeters, so many women would go, what? Like, if this is 4 centimeters, then I can't do it. And, but it's like he was out like an hour and a bit after that. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and that comment alone rings true with Lottie's birth, which we can get to, but very much so. So, within an hour and a half, Alfie was born. And for me, that was wild, because I mean, not that Frankie's birth was long. He was born at 11:30 a.m. So it was only 7-8 hours, which is, I think, pretty monumentous for a first birth, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know? And so, yeah, like I remember with Alfie, I was at the point where nothing was comfortable. And I was like trying all these positions, and the midwife was phenomenal. And she was like, look, let's get you, I was on my hands and knees on the floor, and she was like, look, let's get you up on, let's change positions. And I was like, oh, like I'm at the point where even, you know, trying to change a position right now, it's not going to happen. And somehow we did it. I got up onto the bed, and I was on, you know, like leaning on the back of the headrest and on all fours again. And she was like, you're doing phenomenally, of which I was. And she was like, someone was giving birth down the hallway and they needed her. And so she's like, I've just got to duck down to the other birth. I'll be back in 20 minutes, whatever. Great. We're getting uncomfortable here, but, and I was like, oh, and then I remember in this moment, I started going, yeah, okay, this is getting to the point where I'm not coping. And I remember being in a contraction and thinking, when this contraction finishes, I'm going to turn I hadn't had any vaginal exams. So I had one when I got to the hospital, which I was okay with. And then I asked for no more unless I requested them. And so I hadn't had one from when I got there at 4 centimeters, right? So I remember being in my mind and going, after this contraction, I need to turn to Michael and ask him to get the midwife back, because I need her to assess where I'm at. Like I'm at a point where I want to know, because I'm in a lot of pain. I'm hoping that you're comfortable with me using the term pain.
Oh, of course, yes. Birth is painful. Let's just call a spade a spade.
Totally. I'm like, I'm in a lot of pain, and we're either at the point where I need some assistance in that department, or I'm pushing this baby out. Like we're at the finish line.
It's like a fork in the road here, totally.
Literally. And after that contraction finished, I felt a thud, and the fetal ejection reflex went into full throttle. Like I can't describe to you how phenomenal that experience was. Like it was just, I still get like shivers from it. It was the freaking best. Like, oh. So my body just was actively started pushing, and I'm looking at Michael going, what is going on? Because I'd had Frankie's birth as a contrast as well, where it was like a real active management of it. Yeah. And this was just my body doing what it was meant to do, right? And there was no one in the room because they were all at the other birth. And so Michael runs down the hallway. He's like belting down the hallway going, I need a midwife. My wife is pushing. And so they're like, 2 midwives run back into the room, and I still had my undies on because I didn't cover it. You could hear it. Yeah. So they're ripping like one's on either side. They're ripping my undies off.
Like actually ripped them?
Yep. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And Alfie's head was there, and she was like, yep. And literally 2 pushes later, he was here. Like it was just phenomenal, like so beautiful. And I remember leaving that birth just going, how good are women? Like it was just the most empowering experience. And I felt so accomplished having gone through that, in contrast to Frankie's. And it was just so beautiful to have everything go as I had hoped it would.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was really lovely. And then the twins were after Alfie. So the twins are 14 months younger than Alfie. So
okay.
Close. Obviously, like a twin pregnancy is high risk on paper, right? The second it's multiples. Fortunately, I had pretty straightforward experience. Polly, who was twin 2, had a couple of like ultrasound funnies, like that. Her umbilical arterial outflow of one of her arteries was intermittently going up, I think, or down. Something was funny. Something was going on with it. But she'd also get normal readings, so I ended up having to have a fair few scans. I think I was down to a weekly scan, if not maybe even more, at the end of the pregnancy, because they wanted. Although she was getting normal, it was a weird one, because they said if there's something really wrong, they can't ever get a normal reading. It's something to do with that. And so they're like, we're not really alarmed, but we really need to heavily monitor it because things can go south quickly.
Okay.
So that was it. Yeah, like let's say from 32 weeks on, I was quite heavily monitored. Mind you, they say for twins that full term is 36 weeks. So a twin pregnancy is 36 weeks on paper. And so, full term is 36 weeks. That doesn't mean that just like 40 weeks for a singleton. It doesn't mean that that's when they let you go to as such. And so, yes, we were getting heavily monitored about it. She also had increased, like she had polyhydramnios.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so increased fluid. And so we were just monitoring that. And then we got to a point where they just basically said, like, so I got to 36, a scan at 36 weeks, and they were like, it's still funny. They're still doing really well, but at this point, they're safer out than in. And we don't want to risk it because things can switch overnight, basically. And so there was a chat of induction. For me, induction, fortunately, even with Frankie, I had started dilating before going into labour, but I knew, being my third birth, that I was a great candidate for an induction as such, because my body had gone through it already. The best candidate is probably the right way to say it. And so for me, then I had an appointment with the obstetrician the day before.
And was this the same obstetrician? Because you said, okay, so all of your babies, you had the same. That's so nice that you felt like you trusted them and that you built up, like.
I have, like, withdrawals now. I feel like I just want to go and see him all the time because he's just such a beautiful human as well. And it's like, when you break up with your obstetrician or your midwife, like, it's such a weird, or your doula.
It's really sad.
Like, they've been with you through the best times of your life.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's always awful saying goodbye. I'm always like, have another baby really soon so that we can hang out again.
We had planned to only have 4, and then so when I called the obstetrician with Lottie, when I was pregnant with Lottie, I called them and I said, and they knew me, obviously.
So you had said, like, we're finished now, that's it.
Yeah. And so, but we'd had, 5 years of knowing it. Well, I probably only had a few months really in between. I did, between giving birth and getting back into the system, being pregnant again. So I was besties with them. And so I called and I said, hi, it's Ruby Kellaway, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh, and they immediately went quiet. And then I was like, and they're like, oh my God, and then I said, I've got a question for you. And they're like, oh, thank gosh, I was so worried you were going to tell me you were pregnant again, like, jokingly, like, it was a really lighthearted conversation. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but the question I was going to ask is, how many people do you know that are stupid enough to have 5 kids? And they were just like, no way. And I was like, yep, it's me. I'm that person.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So,
wow.
Yes. So back to the twins. Yes. So appointment with obstetrician day before, I had the induction booked in for the next morning. For me, an induction was they were going to break my waters, basically, because I was already, had already been, like, I've got wild videos of my belly, like, contracting in the weeks before, and it would go from, like, huge, obviously, to this, like, rectangle. Like, it would, wild. And so the appointment before the induction, I had an internal exam just to see where we were at, to see if I was able just to go straight to, obviously, my waters being broken, of which I was. I think I was already, it was over, like, at least 2 centimetres dilated. So they were comfortable enough to know that it would be fine. Got to the hospital the next morning. I think I was nearly 4 centimetres already on the morning of. So who knows what the due date was the birth date was going to be if the induction didn't happen. But so it was quite like a medicalised approach because of the high risk. So I had to have an epidural line inserted. It didn't have to be on. It had to be like, they called it like a twilight, basically, just to make sure that they knew that it was working. But I didn't have to have it up. So basically, you probably know, but with twins, the risk of it's primarily the second baby being an emergency Caesar, or even just a significant, like an internal retrieval, basically, where they have to quite quickly and somewhat aggressively, to some extent, go and get the second bub out very quickly, is quite high. And to do that, you would want to have some pain relief, basically, especially of course with a cesarean, like, and it's a matter of it being a high emergency category rather than a lower emergency category. They need to get them out ASAP. So epidural line was in. This was all at like 7 a.m, let's say, and the girls were born at 10:30, something like that. So again, like a really fast birth.
Wow.
Which was great. I wasn't able to really actively move around or anything because I had the epidural line in, but I was able to feel everything, which was fantastic, to the point where the obstetrician had gone, and I joked because he missed Alfie's birth because it was so fast, and I was always joking with him saying, like, you better be, if there's a birth that I want you to be at, it would be the twins.
The twins.
Like, just because there's a little bit more to consider. And he had gone, and then I was like, I said to the midwives, I'm ready to push. I can feel bub is there. And they're like, oh, like, are you sure? And I'm like, I have like, I know that I have an epidural in, but I feel like I'm feeling everything. And they just didn't believe it because obviously with an epidural, it slows everything down, right? So they were anticipating that they were going to have hours to just, you know, twiddle their fingers and the obstetrician could go and get coffee and come back or whatever it was. And I was like, no, this is happening now. And so with a twin birth, you have to have the healthcare providers for each baby, right?
Yeah.
So in a private, well, no, it's not in a public setting as well. You have to have an obstetrician per child, right? Because it's high risk. So in the room, I had 4 midwives, 2 obstetricians, a special care nurse, and an ICU nurse. So what's that? 10 people?
No pediatricians as well?
Sorry, that's what it was. A special care nurse and a pediatrician.
Okay.
That's what it was, yeah. So what, like 10 people or something?
Yeah, it's a lot of people.
I couldn't care less, like whatever, you know, the more the merrier. And not many people get to see a vaginal twin birth, right?
Yeah.
So for them, it was awesome, to the point where there was one midwife, I think it was quite a quiet night on the ward and, in delivery. And so one of the midwives was like, hey, do you mind if I come in? I'm like, you can come in, but you have to film and take photos of the birth. I'm like, you can be in the room, but you need a purpose.
I love it.
So I got all these beautiful, because I wasn't able to have a birth photographer with that birth because I think it was during COVID. There was restrictions. Yeah. So I had one with Frankie, and then I couldn't have one with Alfie and the twins, and then I had one with Lottie, which was awesome. So
special.
So special. And then so with the twins, yeah, I remember being kind of like the obstetrician chatting to me beforehand saying the first one is normally straightforward, especially for people who have had kids before. You know, you usually have a straightforward vaginal birth for twin one if they are like head down.
Yeah.
Right. That was one of the prerequisites for having a vaginal birth, is that they wanted twin one to be head down.
Okay, so if twin 2 was breached, the OB didn't mind that so much?
And Polly was. So Polly was breech.
Okay.
But not an issue. Even if they're transverse of anything, it's not an issue, because the reality is basically when the first baby is out, all of the space changes, right? Because
for sure.
It all opens up.
Yes.
So the role of the second obstetrician was actually to keep twin 2 in position. So once you birth, and that was the real moment of truth, basically, in the birth, is like once Sadie was out, right? And I remember him saying it will be quite intense between the two because that's where things can happen. And so we had the second obstetrician was literally like holding Polly like this in my belly. And it took, I think they were birthed 15 minutes apart. So it took 15 minutes to actually, she was so high up in my tummy. It was actually to get her down into the birth canal that took so long. And then it was 2 pushes later and she was out. But I had to push her all the way into the birth canal. So that took, let's say 15 minutes or so. And that was when, you know, everyone was biting their nails in the room. And then I remember when she had engaged or, you know, at least gotten down far enough, the second obstetrician stepped away and I just had this wave rush over me of like, we're here.
We're here.
Like,
wow. Oh, I've got
and that was just,
goosebumps.
like honestly, I still get emotional about it. It was just the best feeling knowing we're okay, like we're safe.
Wow.
And you've done it, like you've achieved what you were hoping that you would. And so Michael had Sadie, who was twin 1, for skin to skin while I was birthing Polly, and then.
And was he standing right next to you? Could he see everything? And he was like,
so he was off, like just off to the side. But
yeah,
I mean, next to me as much as you can when there's that many people involved in the birth. And then I received Polly, and then Sadie came, and it was beautiful.
Wow.
That's 3rd birth, and then 4th birth, Lottie, who we also call Satan in our household, because she has just absolutely turned our lives upside down with everything going on with her. But like jokes aside, because of the other 2 prior births, we were like, oh, this could be incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Because on paper you get more and more efficient the more kids you have, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I would joke saying I'm going to sneeze, like literally sneeze this child out, because Alfie was an hour and a half. What record are we breaking, kind of thing, from here? And so I got to the hospital with her and it was textbook the same as Alfie's birth. As in, I just laboured around the room. I was just walking, had my TENS machine, which is like crack cocaine for a pregnant woman. It is like the bee's knees. That's all I used for Alfie and Lottie. And I remember getting to the point that I got to with Alfie, and I'm like, we're here. Like, this is the level I was at when I started. My body just started involuntarily pushing Bob out. Like, I've made it. Like, and then so then I did the same thing. I was like to the because I was waiting. I didn't want to have an internal check, and so I was waiting to start pushing because I felt I was at that point.
Yeah.
And I ended up, it just wasn't happening and taking ages and the pain, like I was getting to a point where I was not coping again. And I was like, I'm going to need to have some pain relief. I'm just not coping. And I was so locked in on, I was standing at the edge of the bed, just like swaying, and I couldn't get out of that position. And the midwife was like, well, to do an examination, I'm going to have to get you into a better position so that I can assess you. And I was like, okay, well, because she'd prior asked me to change positions to see if it would help move
kind
things
of
along.
get things going. Yeah.
And I just was like, I felt as if every muscle in my body had like contracted into that one position, and I just couldn't get it. And then when
your instincts.
Yeah. And then when I knew I had to be examined, I had to change position. So I got up on the and she'd asked me she wanted to use a peanut ball between my legs, and she was like, I want you to be side lying and get this peanut ball between your legs because I think that Bub is not in a great position. And I said, are they posterior? And she said, yeah, they're posterior. And I was like, okay. And then I'm getting flashbacks. It's like, okay, Frankie, like that's what happened with Frankie. Like, no wonder things aren't progressing. We're getting a bit, it's stagnant here.
Mm.
And basically, like we were chatting about earlier, my body was contracting as if I was at pushing stage because I was getting contractions that didn't stop, basically. Like they were stopping with the tiniest little break in between and going again.
Yeah.
And my body was recognizing that it was ready to push, but because Lottie was posterior, she wasn't stimulating my cervix enough to completely dilate.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting up onto the bed to have the cervical examination, and at that point I was, I think, 5 centimeters or something, and I was like, that broke me. Talking about the number where it felt, but I was like, I can't be. I'm at 10. Like I'm pushing out right now. Like this is where my body's telling me I'm at.
Yeah.
And I ended up calling for an epidural because I was like, I can't keep going. Like I'm at my threshold here. And she was like, okay, like she knew she was like, we just need to move this baby slightly and you're pushing out in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
While you're here, I'm going to give you the peanut ball. And so like we had the peanut ball, and I think it was, within 20 minutes I birthed Lottie. So literally the peanut ball just opened up my pelvis, and I'm like raving to everyone. I'm like, do the peanut ball, everyone. Like it's the best thing ever. But it just opened my pelvis up enough to get her to rotate. And then the rest is history. Yeah. So I called for the epidural, and I don't know, actually I should have asked if the midwife actually called for it, because I think she kind of knew where we were at and like that things would shift, and that by the time if the anaesthetist got there, I would have already had a baby on the chest, gone and run around the block and come back and have breakfast. But, so turns out just with that slight sort of positional change, I had the same birth as with Alfie. But wild to think like with that sort of slight positional change, how much it impacted the progression of it.
Massive. It's so massive. Yeah, and I feel like it can be so helpful to understand like the difference between the pelvic inlet and the pelvic outlet, like making space at the top when baby's relatively high up, and then because those are different things. Like opening a pelvis is not one thing necessarily. There's like and the difference that it makes, like when you do have a situation like that where it is causing something to kind of things stall a little bit, it can be so helpful.
Yes. So all little nuances here and there that are different between all of them, but all in all, yes, a beautiful experience 4 times over.
Wow.
And I guess in hindsight, like reflecting back on how the midwife impacted my birth with Frankie, and then I had 3 amazing like support teams after that. It's polarizing how different it was. So completely kind of like reaffirms the importance of being supported by someone you trust, who will get you through and advocate for you if you can't. And you know what, I always thought I could advocate for myself, and I didn't with Frankie, because someone who I thought on paper knew me better, which no one does, was able to change that course of the birth for me.
It's insane. It's crazy. I always say you are your birth team.
Yeah, totally.
Like you are what you eat. You are your birth team, because you're in labor. Like even what you were saying about you can like know all the things, but it's really hard to apply all the things that you know in the heat of the moment for the mum who's in labor, but also for the dad. Like, it's kind of like, I love the analogy of like when you do a first aid course, you know, you've done the first aid course, you've learned all this stuff and it's in your head. But then when you are faced with the intense situation, so often you forget, like, you're like, oh, where do I start? What do I do? Like, it can be really overwhelming.
Yeah, no, definitely. Got to practice and have those conversations as well. I think also, to be honest, like Michael and I had chatted about my birth plan as such and, you know, what I had wanted. But, yeah, we, upon reflection, could have done so much more work beforehand and it would have probably been a different experience. So, yeah, for sure. Put the work in. Definitely put the work in, have the conversations, have the support team, for sure.
Yeah, so cool. It's so crazy, actually. Our first 2 births were virtually the same experience. Like, everything that when you were down to like having lots and lots of sort of early prodromal labor where nothing was really happening for a long time, and then baby was posterior, really mean midwife, like all the things. I was like, this was literally my birth. And then the second time, my second baby flew out as well. Like, it was like a 2-hour, my first labor was 53 hours of like proper active labor to the end. And then 2 hours the second time. So I feel like this is crazy. It's so similar.
I was almost in shock after Alfie's birth because I just did not think I was at that point, right? Like, I was just like, what? This is what we can do? Like, that experience that I had prior isn't what it has to be. You know? Like, it was,
100%. And what you were saying about the recovery too, like, I also ended up having an episiotomy and like literally identical experience. And the recovery afterwards I thought was normal. And I was like, oh yeah, like, but then the second time comparing the two, I was like, whoa, this is so different. Yeah, crazy.
Yes.
I would have loved to have twins. I mean, I'm sure it's so hard. Was it so much harder, the newborn stage? No?
No, because like genuinely, when we call Lottie Satan, it is accurate because
she was so much harder.
So hard. And I would have the twins newborn stage any day over Lottie's. Like, I think we were really blessed with really straightforward twins. And we just got onto it early, and I always would wake one up. If one woke up to feed, I would always wake the other one up and feed them just to try and keep them
kind of
as aligned as possible. But yeah, like I look back on that time period fondly. Like, I don't feel like it's hard. Whereas I know it's been mum at the moment who is in my mother's group with Lottie, and she's going through the ringer. She's like, how did you even do this? And I'm like, I must have just had the easier option, like as easy as it could be as such with twins. Don't get me wrong, it's hard. Like, I'm not taking away from that, but I think it was as easy as it could have been, probably.
Wow.
Yeah, wild.
So cool. Oh, that was amazing, Ruby. That was so cool to hear those stories. I just loved that. That was so great.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a rating or a comment, and I can't wait to see you back here for the next one.